Officer Marcus Webb worked at Pelican Bay State Prison in California for 11 years before becoming inmate P47829 at the same facility. The walk from the staff parking lot to the intake processing area was the same route he'd walked thousands of times, except this time he wore handcuffs instead of a badge, and the guards processing him were former colleagues who wouldn't make eye contact. Some looked away out of shame or discomfort. Others stared with something approaching satisfaction. Marcus had arrested inmates, written disciplinary reports, supervised cells where men spent 23 hours a day. Now he was about to experience all of it from the other side. This is the story of what happens when a prison guard goes to prison, how the system treats its own when they become inmates, and what Marcus learned about the institution he'd served that he never understood until he was locked inside it. Marcus started as a correctional officer in 2008, fresh out of the academy at 24 years old. He came from a family of law enforcement. Father was a sheriff's deputy. Uncle was highway patrol. Corrections seemed like a stable career, with benefits, pension, and the satisfaction of public service. His first year was adjustment. Learning to read inmates, understanding the informal rules that govern prison life, developing the emotional distance necessary to work in an environment of constant tension and occasional violence. By his third year, he was confident, knew how to handle most situations, had earned respect from senior officers and grudging acknowledgement from inmates that he was firm but fair. The relationships between guards and inmates at Pelican Bay were complex. Some officers were openly hostile, viewing inmates as subhuman. Others maintained professional distance. "You're here to do time. I'm here to supervise. Neither of us chose this situation, but we'll make it work." Marcus fell into the latter category. He didn't socialize with inmates, didn't do favors that violated regulations, but he also didn't go out of his way to make their lives harder than the system already made them. This approach earned him a reputation as a decent officer, which in prison terms meant he followed rules without being needlessly cruel. But in 2017, Marcus made a decision that would destroy his career and his freedom. An inmate named Robert Chen approached him during a routine cell check with a proposal. Chen had been at Pelican Bay for 6 years, on a 15-year sentence for drug trafficking. He had maintained connections outside and needed someone to bring in cell phones. The payment would be substantial, $5,000 per phone, paid to Marcus's girlfriend through untraceable methods. Marcus's initial response was no. He knew the consequences of guard corruption, had seen officers arrested, prosecuted, sent to the same prisons where they'd worked. But Marcus was in financial trouble. His girlfriend was pregnant. They'd bought a house, beyond their means. Credit card debt was mounting. $5,000 per phone was more than he made in a month. He told himself it would be temporary, just a few phones to get caught up on bills. Then he'd stop. This is how corruption always begins. Not with evil intent, but with rationalization. Just this once. Just until I'm financially stable. Just enough to solve the immediate problem. The first phone was terrifying. Marcus smuggled it in pieces over 3 days. Battery one day, phone body the next, charger the third. He passed it to Chen during a manufactured distraction in the corridor. The transaction took seconds. $5,000 appeared in his girlfriend's account 2 days later, via cryptocurrency, converted to cash through a process Marcus didn't fully understand. The money solved immediate problems. The relief was enormous, and the ease of it. How simple the smuggling was, how the security measures he knew intimately were easy to circumvent once you wore the uniform, made the second phone easier to justify. Over 10 months, Marcus brought in 23 phones. He developed systems, understood which shifts had lazier supervision, which staff entrants had broken security cameras, which inmates could be trusted to pay without creating problems. He made over $100,000, paid off debts, bought a new car, started a college fund for his daughter. He told himself he was providing for his family, that the phones weren't hurting anyone. Inmates used them to talk to families, to maintain connections that the expensive prison phone system made difficult. He wasn't bringing in drugs or weapons, just communication devices. The investigation began when a rival gang discovered Chen's phone operation and informed authorities to damage his business. Prison gang politics often fuel investigations more effectively than guard vigilance. The anonymous tip led to a cell search that found phones Chen hadn't hidden adequately. Those phones led to more phones. The scope of the network became clear. Investigators started reviewing staff movements, looking for patterns. Marcus's name appeared in security logs at suspicious times. His financial records showed deposits inconsistent with his salary. The cryptocurrency trail was traced back to Chen's outside associates. Marcus was arrested at his home in March 2019. Federal charges: conspiracy to provide contraband in a correctional facility, multiple counts. He was offered a plea deal, 5 years in federal prison, with testimony against Chen's outside network, or go to trial and risk 15 years if convicted. Marcus took the plea. In August 2019, he was sentenced to 5 years. The judge, showing no mercy despite Marcus's clean record prior to this, ordered him to serve his sentence at Pelican Bay, the same institution where he'd worked, the same cell blocks he'd supervised, among inmates he'd arrested, disciplined, or denied privileges to during his 11 years as a guard. The arrival was surreal, being processed by officers who'd been his colleagues. Some had been his friends. They'd had barbecues together. Their kids played together. Now they wouldn't look at him. The intake officer who fingerprinted him had been his academy classmate. Neither spoke beyond required official statements. Marcus was assigned to administrative segregation initially, solitary confinement, ostensibly for his protection, but really because the administration didn't know what else to do with him. Putting a former guard in general population was dangerous. Other guards hated him for betraying the profession. Inmates hated him for being a guard. He had no allies. After 3 weeks in isolation, Marcus was moved to a protective custody unit, a section for inmates who couldn't safely be in general population. Sex offenders, informants, gang dropouts, and corrupt guards. The social hierarchy in protective custody was different from main yards, less organized, more chaotic, but also less immediate danger from organized gang violence. The inmates there knew Marcus had been a guard. Some had been at Pelican Bay during his tenure. They remembered him. Most kept distance. A few tried to befriend him, seeing advantage in connection with someone who knew how the system worked. Marcus's perspective shifted completely within months. Things he'd dismissed when wearing a uniform became intolerable experiencing them firsthand. The food he'd considered adequate was barely edible. The medical care he'd thought sufficient was dangerously inadequate. The disciplinary procedures he'd participated in were arbitrary and often unjust. Inmates he'd written up for minor infractions, talking during count, being slow to follow orders. Now he understood the context he'd ignored. How mental illness, or language barriers, or simple human frustration made compliance difficult. How guards wielded power capriciously. How the system treated humans like inventory, to be managed rather than people to be rehabilitated. He saw corruption he'd been blind to as an officer. Guards who smuggled drugs making multiples of what Marcus had made with phones. officers who assaulted inmates, knowing there'd be no real consequences because inmate testimony was discredited by default. The institutional culture that protected bad guards and punished those who reported misconduct. Marcus had been part of this culture, had participated in the silence, had looked away when he saw things that troubled him, because reporting colleagues was considered betrayal. The other guards' treatment of him was educational. Some went out of their way to make his life harder. Cell searches every week, mail deliberately delayed, disciplinary write-ups for minor infractions. They wanted him to suffer for betraying the badge. Others treated him with studied indifference, neither helping nor hindering. A very few showed quiet sympathy, perhaps seeing in Marcus's fall a reminder that the line between guard and inmate was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. One wrong decision, one financial crisis, one moment of weakness, and the uniform could be replaced with prison greens. The inmates' reactions were mixed. Some enjoyed seeing a guard experience what they'd experienced, took satisfaction in his visible discomfort, his struggle to adapt. Others were surprisingly sympathetic, recognized that Marcus, like many of them, had made bad choices under pressure, had been decent as a guard, didn't deserve the special hell of being incarcerated in the facility where he'd worked. A few sought his advice on legal issues or prison navigation, recognizing his insider knowledge, even though his judgment had proven flawed. Marcus's wife divorced him in 2020. She'd known nothing about the phones, about the money. When she learned the truth, she felt betrayed, took their daughter and moved to another state. Marcus lost contact with his family. His father, the sheriff's deputy, disowned him. The law enforcement family that had defined his identity wanted nothing to do with him. He was alone in ways that transcended physical isolation. As of 2024, Marcus has served 4 years of his 5-year sentence. He's eligible for release in late 2024 with good time credits. But release brings different problems. He's a convicted felon, can never work in law enforcement or corrections again. His pension is forfeited. His career is destroyed. More immediately, he has enemies, both among former colleagues who hate him and among inmates or their associates who might target him for past actions as a guard. Witness protection isn't available for corrupt guards. He'll be released with no job prospects, no family support, and legitimate fear for his safety. The experience has changed him in ways he struggles to articulate. He understands now that the system he served was broken in fundamental ways he'd refused to see. That the rehabilitation rhetoric disguised warehousing. That the power he'd wielded as a guard had corrupted him in subtle ways, long before he smuggled the first phone. That the institution attracted people who either became callous to suffering or left the profession. That he'd been becoming callous without realizing it. And the corruption was almost a logical extension of the institutional culture he'd absorbed. If you want to explore more stories about the complexities of the criminal justice system, about how power corrupts and institutions fail, subscribe to Prison Diaries. Because Marcus Webb's story reveals that the line between guard and inmate isn't drawn by morality or character, but by circumstances, choices, and sometimes just bad luck. And understanding what happens when that line is crossed reveals truths about the system that are uncomfortable for everyone involved.